The Enclave is quite possibly the single most incisive bit of satire in a franchise known for its satirical bite. First introduced in Fallout 2 as a caricature of the worst aspects of the American establishment, the Enclave has since become a favorite of many players, whether as an evil they love to hate or the best hope for exterminating those filthy mutants and rebuilding America from the ruin of nuclear war. The Enclave sees itself as the rightful inheritor of the American tradition on a crusade to bring back America's glory days. But rather than the founding ideals, the Enclave embraces a rigid and dogmatic ideology of purity. It's authoritarian, genocidal, and often incompetent. It waves the stars and stripes as it cleanses the surviving Americans from the land. Stylistically, it's equal parts 1930s European totalitarianism and 1950s kitschy Americana. But before we can get to the question of whether Colonel Autumn's Enclave is best Enclave, we have to peel back what the Enclave is. There are many good lore videos out there covering the Enclave's backstory from their formation up to and through the Fallout games. But to really understand them, I think we first have to go back even further. Pre-lore, before Fallout's history deviates from ours. Before the Second World War, the United States was a very different country. The military-industrial complex and the web of intelligence and surveillance agencies we take for granted as part of the landscape didn't exist. In 1939, the U.S. Army had about 190,000 men in active service. That's the whole Army, not just combat personnel. At its wartime peak, it was more than 8 million, and for the last 20 years or so, it has fluctuated around the 500,000 mark, give or take, depending on surges and whatnot. During World War II, the U.S. military was not only greatly expanded, but the branches were more tightly coordinated. That's why the Pentagon was built. If you're going to plan something like the D-Day landing, you need to have the Army and the Navy in the same room. Additionally, the Office of Strategic Services was created as an intelligence gathering and clandestine shady shit outfit. After the war, it became the foundation for the Central Intelligence Agency, whose steadfast commitment to the American ideals of liberty and justice we've all come to rely on. It all represents a growth and consolidation of power over the course of the war. Afterward, the American military and political establishment pivoted to the Soviet Union as the new threat. They absorbed large chunks of the German intelligence, industrial, and scientific base. General Reinhard Gehlen of the German Army's intelligence service was a key asset for the CIA. NASA was in many ways the German rocket program transplanted to America. While the war was a fight, it was also, on an institutional, cultural level, a mating. Two eagles got together, spilled a lot of blood and made a lot of noise, and birthed something new. And the Cold War nurtured it. A vast defense and intelligence apparatus coalesced and entrenched itself to the point that it carried considerable weight in the making of policy. And of course, they're not separate spheres. Military officers frequently go to work for defense contractors. CIA assets, up to and including directors of the agency, go to work for news media crafting narratives. The doorway between industry and government is wide open. The current Secretary of Defense was a member of the board of Raytheon and will no doubt return. And generations of this have led to the formation of a distinct managerial class across industry, politics, media, and bureaucracy. They all go to the same Ivy League schools, read the same publications, live in the same gated communities, an insular segment of society. What you might call an enclave. These are the people that are running the country when the world hits an energy crisis in the early 2070s. Some of the government officials are formally part of the Enclave, while other key figures in industry and the sciences are part of the circle, even if not formal members. A ruling cabal doesn't really need membership cards, they're already part of the club. In 2073, the world's last known oil reserve is controlled by the Enclave through one of their front companies. This monopoly on the last oil exacerbates tensions with other powers, China in particular, putting the world on course for nuclear war. But the Enclave has a plan. No, they don't fund development of new energy sources and work for diplomatic solutions. What kind of America do you think this is? They accept that nuclear war is inevitable and make sure they'll survive it. They shelter in fortified locations around the country, with the Poseidon oil rig off the California coast being their primary base of operations. October 23, 2077 was a bright and sunny day. Everywhere. Lots of bright little suns rising. The Enclave carried on continuity of government procedures and prepared for the day when they'd crawl out from the fallout, smash communism forever, and rebuild a new America from the ashes of the old. But first they have to do medical experiments on surviving Americans so they can engineer a virus to wipe out those mutants that are in the way. This is the main story of Fallout 2. The Enclave captures groups of people, some of them sheltered in underground vaults and others from wasteland tribes, and subjects them to all manner of medical experimentation as they try to develop a version of FEV, or the Forced Evolutionary Virus, that will kill mutants instead of just making more of them. Dr. Charles Curling of the U.S. Army Chemical Corps develops a variant, Curling-13, that they plan to release and let the jet stream carry it across the continent like the mother of all chemtrails. All of this is done under the authority of President Dick Richardson, who lives on an oil rig. But you, as the player character, get to blow that up and deal a crippling throat punch to the Enclave. Their incompetence is a factor in that. The remaining Enclave facilities on the West Coast are eventually overrun by rival factions, most notably the base at Navarro, which was taken by the new California Republic, and in some ways echoes the American assimilation of German industry and intel assets after World War II. A handful of Enclave survivors show up in Fallout New Vegas, but the faction's revival comes about in Fallout 3. Fallout 3 is essentially a soft reboot of the franchise after Bethesda acquired the rights from the bankruptcy of Interplay. It changes Fallout from a turn-based isometric game to a first-person shooter, it jinks with the lore some, and it relocates the focus to the East Coast. The Enclave returns, now based in the underground bunker complex at Raven Rock, which is a real facility designed for continuity of government purposes, amongst other things. Fallout 3's story centers around a big water purification facility built into the Jefferson Memorial. The Enclave wants to get it working, but they plan to contaminate the water with a strain of the mutant-killing FEV, while simultaneously running a propaganda campaign via wandering iBots and radio broadcasts to win over the locals.
You're listening to Enclave Radio. I'm John Henry Eden, President of the Enclave, President of America, President of your heart.
Things get odder at this point. The Enclave is now run by President John Henry Eden, a genocidal computer. Just run with it.
To do so, we must rid ourselves of the mutations that have plagued us for so long. These super mutants, ghouls, hideous creatures.
Eden's plan will kill everyone that lives in the wasteland.
The waters of life flowed at last. But the virus contained within soon eradicated all those deemed unworthy of salvation. The capital wasteland, despite its progress, became a graveyard.
But there's some apparent friction with Eden's second-in-command, Colonel Augustus Autumn, who may not be entirely on board. It has been argued that Colonel Autumn isn't such a bad guy. He opposed Eden's plan to spike the water with FEV. When you're held captive by the Enclave, he comes across as sort of reasonable.
Thank you for cooperating. I'm afraid we no longer have need of your services.
You son of a bitch. Okay, maybe he has a point. After all, we do go on to completely ruin his day when he tries to activate the purifier.
You again. I can't say I'm surprised. You and your ilk seem hell-bent on destroying everything our government has worked to achieve.
Maybe he really does have a plan to use clean water as the basis for rebuilding a functioning nation-state that actually includes the people already living there. Or maybe he's just an aspiring warlord who will lie and murder to get what he wants, just as he lies to and murders the player if given the chance. Which finally brings us to the question. Is Colonel Autumn the least bad option? Do any of these factions offer a real chance at lifting the wasteland out of barbarism and rebuilding America? Let's look at the choices we're given. The Enclave under Eden is right out. You can't rebuild if everyone is dead. A lot of people like the Brotherhood of Steel under Owen Lyons. They not only fix the water purifier, but they give the water away in a great big charity op. You can't beat that, right? Well, as much as it gives us the warm fuzzies to help people in the short term, this actually inhibits rebuilding. People don't have to do anything to get the water. The Brotherhood just delivers it like Santa Claus in power armor, creating dependency. Of course, they could set up a system of patronage, charging tribute for access to the purified water, leading to a whole trading hub forming around the Jefferson Memorial and the start of regional commerce. They could give discounted rates to merchants based on the distance they have to transport it, thereby incentivizing an improved system of transporting goods that would quickly be used to move more than just barrels of water. They could deliver water as a subsidy for farms, taking a percentage of the crop as a tax to support their forces, but also creating a steady food supply traded throughout the region. They could set up a currency backed by purified water, allowing them to generate credit for infrastructure investment while facilitating independent commerce. But they don't do any of that. They just give it away, and that's the end of it. It's a short-term boost for the local population that will lead to a humanitarian crisis when the Brotherhood inevitably quits doing it. Colonel Autumn is a lying, murderous son of a bitch. But the wasteland is full of lying murderers, and a heavy hand is needed to bring them to heel. And as the Enclave remnants in New Vegas show us, there are decent people in the Enclave, people that genuinely want to build a better world.
I miss those days sometimes. We all had a purpose, you know? I admit that some of the folks in charge were pretty ruthless. The rest of us, though, we were just trying to civilize things.
But the problem with the Enclave isn't leadership or an insufficient ratio of good people in the rank and file. The problem is their thinking, their assumptions, their worldview. Because the Enclave, in their core, in the way they think about individuals and liberty, aren't really Americans in any philosophical sense. They don't believe that individuals have fundamental rights. They don't consider that they might be wrong, unless you make the speech check on POTUS GTP at Raven Rock.
New directive accepted. Self-destruct sequence initialized. Civilian is advised to remove hazardous FEV material and exit at once.
But the Enclave is built on an assumption of elitism, superiority, and the right of might. The Enclave may well build some kind of a nation, but we wouldn't recognize it as America. They're a ruling class in search of someone to rule over, but they're trapped in the contradiction of needing to destroy the other, which they define so broadly that it's practically everyone. Rather than try to prevent a civilization-ending war, they instead put all their effort into preserving themselves. After the war, they become even more insular and elitist. They attempted to exterminate anyone that wasn't them. They're philosophically incapable of working with the local population on an equal footing or of establishing a stable but limited government. All they can do is demand obedience, kill those who resist, and set up a top-down economy based on exploiting what's left for their own ends. That's not rebuilding. At best, it's colonialism. Only instead of the cultural and technological limitations that applied during the initial colonization of North America by European powers, the Enclave is an industrial power with a history of genocide and the means to actually do it. It doesn't matter who's in charge of it, it's going to slaughter and enslave. They're elitist, almost a hereditary aristocracy. They're not going to do drudge work when they can force wastelanders to do it instead. Above all, they're control freaks with a fervent belief in their cause. That's a combo that can't recognize its mistakes and has a very hard time changing course. That said, the Enclave may still, in the end, be the key to rebuilding something approximating the United States of America. Not because the Enclave will do it themselves or intentionally, but because there's an extremely high probability that they'll build an agricultural and manufacturing capacity, but in the context of an oppressive system that exploits the people it rules. And in so doing, they'll create a population with the desire to overthrow the Enclave in favor of a freer system, a revolutionary population that will eventually have the numbers and the means to destroy the Enclave's regime. The Enclave can never produce a George Washington. The best they can do is stand in for George III for whatever heirs to the American tradition might arise generations, perhaps centuries later. Or the flowering of liberty never happens. Warlordism gives way to feudalism on a short road to authoritarian technocracy that locks in that dystopian future. It's the nature of governments, of rulers, to expand their power over time, and revolutions usually don't end well. So it strikes me that rebuilding with a power-hungry cabal as the basis is a terrible starting point. We're probably better off leaving it to chance and the resourcefulness of wastelanders. In the end, despite having some decent people working for it, the Enclave is fundamentally evil. And evil should always be resisted, even if all the other options are kinda shit.
I had not considered it from that viewpoint. But then, where does that leave me?